70,000 women die from childbirth bleeding every year, and most of those deaths could be prevented with a treatment that already exists and costs pennies. That's the conclusion of a major new series published this month in the Lancet. I'm Annabelle Cross. Welcome to MedHeads. Every year, 14 million women experience postpartum hemorrhage, severe bleeding after giving birth. Most survive, but for 70,000 of them, it turns fatal. That's one woman every 7 minutes, every single day. Postpartum hemorrhage is the leading cause of maternal mortality on the planet, and here's what makes that so hard to accept. We've known about it for decades. We have treatments that work, so why is it still killing so many? To understand the problem, you need to know what drives most cases. A systematic review and meta-analysis, published in the Lancet and covering more than 834,000 women across 14 studies, found that 70.6% of all postpartum hemorrhage cases trace back to a single cause: uterine atony. Uterine atony means the uterus fails to contract after delivery. Under normal circumstances, once the baby is born, the uterus clamps down. That muscular squeeze closes off the blood vessels where the placenta was attached. When the uterus stays slack, when it just doesn't tighten, those vessels keep bleeding. The other causes, tears in the birth canal, retained placenta, clotting disorders, are real too. But uterine atony is the biggest driver, and it is also the most preventable. For decades, the standard drug for preventing uterine atony has been Oxytocin. Given by injection right after delivery, it triggers uterine contractions, closing off those blood vessels before serious bleeding can begin. WHO has recommended Oxytocin as the first-line prevention for years. It's cheap, it works, it exists. But it is not consistently reaching every woman who needs it. Cold chain problems are a major reason. In hot climates, Oxytocin must be refrigerated or it loses potency. Add gaps in training, inconsistent supply chains, and stretched health systems, and you end up with a drug that performs well in trials, but fails on the ground. Wide variation in practice means women's lives depend on where they happen to give birth. The June 2026 Lancet series arrives at a turning point. In October 2025, WHO issued sweeping new guidelines that change both when PPH is diagnosed and how it's treated. The old threshold was 500 milliliters of blood loss. The new threshold, drawn from a study of over 300,000 women across 23 countries, is 300 milliliters, paired with any abnormal vital sign. Act earlier. Stop the bleeding sooner. The guidelines also formalized the motive bundle, a package of simultaneous actions. Massage the uterus. Give oxytocic drugs. Administer tranexamic acid, which cuts mortality from bleeding by 31% when given within 3 hours of delivery. Add IV fluids. Examine the birth canal, and escalate if the bleeding doesn't stop. Where cold storage isn't reliable, heat-stable Carbetocin, which needs no refrigeration, is now recommended in place of Oxytocin. Same job, far more durable. What separates this Lancet series from previous calls to action is where it points its attention: the gap between knowing and doing. The evidence is solid, the guidelines are updated, the tools exist, but the Lancet authors are clear. Translating all of this into practice at scale requires political commitment, supply chain investment, training, and ongoing accountability. Programs in Kenya and South Sudan have already shown what's possible. After policy updates, pooled procurement, and simulation-based training, they achieved over 90% coverage of heat-stable Carbetocin among births in their catchment areas. 90%. That's not a theoretical model, that's a proof of concept. 70,000 women a year. 1 every 7 minutes. That is not a failure of medicine, it is a failure of implementation. And that is the kind of problem that can be fixed. If someone you know has experienced postpartum hemorrhage, or this story stayed with you, drop a comment below. I'd genuinely like to know, what part of this surprised you most? Was it the scale of the problem, or the fact that the tools to stop it already exist? Subscribe if you want more of this. Evidence-based health explainers, stripped of the noise. And if you're ready to go deeper, the MedHeads library is extensive. We've covered women's health, metabolic medicine, sleep, stress, exercise, and much more. There's a lot waiting for you. I'm Annabelle Cross. Thanks for watching.